Throughout the history of the United States, we have always enjoyed bountiful harvests. We've never gone hungry because we couldn't produce enough food. We've also had a good solid roof over our heads to shelter us from Mother Nature's bad moods. But these things didn't happen by accident. It was the hard work of the American farmer that grew the bountiful harvest that fed the country, while the loggers and lumbermen provided the wood for our homes. These folks are a part of the fascinating history of the good old U.S. of A. But you know, there's another part of the story of the magnificent machines that these men used to help them till the soil and cut the lumber. In southwestern Ohio, in Darke County, there's a group of people who are actively preserving this piece of our history. These folks take delight in preserving the past by firing up these old engines and making a little coal smoke in the heartland. In the early 1800s, American farmers used horses to plow their fields for planting. Homes were often built out of rough-hewn logs, a typical log cabin. But as the country grew, the demand for more food and better shelter grew with it. Now, while we usually associate the Industrial Revolution with heavy industries like steel mills and railroads, the fact is that the Industrial Revolution held the answer to the farmer's need for increased productivity too. Long-forgotten companies like Russell, Altman, Case, Baker, and several others were household names in the farming communities of the late 19th and early 20th century. These were the leading-edge manufacturers of their day, utilizing what was then the best power source in the world, steam. As the 20th century began, the railroads had been using steam power to move their trains for almost 70 years. Small, early steam engines, like the Tom Thumb here, were the ancestors of what would become an almost universally recognized American institution, the huge steam locomotives, which moved people and products all across our great nation. When it came to generating huge amounts of power, there simply was no better answer than steam. In the late 1800s, a few men of vision realized that if steam power worked for the railroads, it could be harnessed for other uses too. They drew up plans to build a steam engine on a smaller scale, designed to move about on the roads and fields of the country instead of on rails. Now the farmers, threshers, and sawmill operators of America had a new source of power, just what they needed to handle the ever-increasing demand for their products and services. And it's here that a long-standing tradition began, one that continues to this day. All around the country, organizations have been formed that are dedicated to the preservation of these fine old machines and the recognition of the men who built, owned, and operated them. One of the best of these organizations is the Darke County Steam Threshers Association in southwestern Ohio. This is part of the heartland of America, beautiful farm country where huge crops of wheat, corn, soybeans, and other farm products are grown. In this part of the country, hard work is still a part of everyday life. But when the work is done and there's time to relax, thoughts often turn to pleasant memories of the past. And with proud traditions passed down through several generations in many of these families, those memories span over 100 years. The Darke County Steam Threshers Reunion is held each year on the fairgrounds in Greenville, Ohio. These grounds provide just the right combination of wide open spaces and shady drives where thousands of people come to enjoy the show. And it's a unique event. It's not called a show, it's called a reunion. And therein lies a very unique aspect of these gatherings. For many of the people here, it is a reunion, a congregation of folks who enjoy the fellowship of old friends, sharing the common goal of preserving these magnificent machines of our past. Each year, the Darke County Reunion features a certain make of engine and tractor, and this year was no exception. The featured steam engine this year was the Port Huron Mark, while the gas tractors featured a proud old company, Minneapolis Moline. One of the best Port Huron engines in the country makes its home in Michigan. Engineer Tom Fisher cares for this old machine with the fine touch of a good craftsman.
It's a 19-horse Port Huron. A lot of those were built, but this one belongs to the Ford Museum up in Dearborn. We took it out last fall to our own state fair. Now it's the first time it'd been off grounds in probably 40 years. So this is trip number 2. Personally, I like them. That's one of the reasons I went to work for the museum, is I like engines like this. I like what they represent, sort of a throwback to an earlier time when things were a little bit less complicated. A lot of hard work, but less complicated. And I enjoy showing people how this old machinery works. It was quite an experience for me when we went to the fair, where you get a lot of city people who had no idea what an engine like this was, what it was used for, how it ran, the age, so forth. No concept.
Here at the Darke County Reunion, they not only preserve and display these old machines, they run them hard, just the way they were intended to be used when they were in their prime. There are the usual fans and generators to provide a load for the engines so they can make a little noise and show off a bit. But at this reunion, they use these machines to produce useful products, lumber and wheat, that will be sold on the open market after the show is over. Speaking of wheat, watching a crew at work with a steam engine on the separator gives us a chance to see how they threshed wheat the old-fashioned way, with a good team, a good engine, a strong back, and a pitchfork. For many people here, this is the best show in town, and these folks have the best seat in the house. It's also a chance to show the kids some real live history in action. Tom Fisher explains it well.
I guess maybe they don't realize where their food comes from. It comes from the grocery store. And this shows them the amount of labor that was involved many years ago, what it took to get the grain from the field, to get it processed, and then finally get it into baked goods. My big joy is fresh and separating, and that's very educational, I think, to show them how you take the raw grain and explain to them how it's cut and bound, how it's dried, how it's brought in on the bundle racks, how it's pitched in, what happens inside the separator, and finally when it comes out, it's turned into grain.
John Holp, a long-time member of the Darke County crew, is in charge of the threshing operation. The morning threshing has produced a full bin of wheat. Soon, this wheat will be on somebody's breakfast table in the form of cereal or perhaps a loaf of bread. The Holp family has a long tradition of working with steam power. John's great-grandfather was well known in this part of Ohio as a good engineer. Every generation of the Holp family since then, 4 generations in all, have kept this tradition alive. John also owns his own engine, and earlier he had it talking up a storm, working out a horsepower curve on the pony brake. Amos Rixman was controlling the brake. Now we're going to talk with Amos and take a close look at this pony brake just a little later on. While the steam engines were doing their thing in the south field, the antique gas engine tractor drivers were getting ready for their tractor pull, held on the track at the fairgrounds. Now, even though these guys don't make a lot of noise, and they don't blacken the sky with their exhaust like the Superstockers do, their performance is still fun to watch as they dig in and give it their best shot.
Tom Fisher, Wapaw, Cadet, Ohio, 36, John Deere A. Getting that last chug. So, Tom Fisher, Wapaw, Cadet, Ohio, 36, John Deere A. Okay, this is Joe Verog, New Lebanon, Ohio, 37, Moline Z. Okay, here comes Joe. Like I said, hails out of New Lebanon, Ohio. It's a 37Z Minneapolis Moline, the featured tractor here at the Steam Tractors this year. A lot of things going on here this afternoon at Steam Tractors. We got thrashing of wheat, sawmill running, got a dynamometer out there for check your horsepower on your tractors. Tonight at 7 o'clock, I believe, in the gazebo, Deb Rucker will be appearing. Tom Livingston from Union City, Ohio, at 37 Oliver, 1836. We're using a 200-foot track today, so anybody goes 200 foot, 2 tractors or more, we'll have to have it a pull off.
Meanwhile, back on the south end of the grounds, Tom Stevens was busy getting the big mill ready to go. Tom owns a lumber business just down the road in Arcanum, Ohio, so he knows a thing or two about sawmills, logs, and lumber.
Well, of course, you can see the logs are here, and we bring those up from our mill, and they have been run through a debarker to keep them clean here. We don't have to worry about hitting gravel and sand and whatever. And of course here I know what we're going to cut them into. I have my orders to cut either 4/4 grade or crating. We cut 2x4s, 1x6s, 1x4s, and that's for pallet lumber. The poplar, which we're sawing right now, will all go into 4/4 grade. There'll be a truck in here with another load of logs probably in a couple hours, and they'll take the lumber back to the mill, and then next week that'll all be worked into pallet lumber, and then the grade lumber will be graded. We have a grader at our mill, and they grade what we saw here, and as a little bit different on probably a lot of mills. It shows like this. They're set up in a portable fashion like this one, but I come up here and spend about a day making sure that this is all set perfectly level, square, straight, because when we saw grade lumber, it has to be accurate. You can't have it thick or thin. Well, years back, we used to have to depend on some people to bring a mill in and set up, and sometimes they let you wonder if they're going to be here on time, you know, and we had a chance to buy this mill, it's the Meadows, and we had a chance to buy this mill and have our own mill, and we kind of look after it and keep it up into shape, whatever needs to be done, we keep it up. It's right up to snuff, and it's a quick mill. It's an ideal suited mill for what we do here. We can put on a good show.
Here at the mill, there are lots of youngsters watching the action, and that's just fine with Tom.
This makes them realize what our country was built on and the heritage of the country, and we're the only ones that gives them an opportunity to see this, and I think it's very important for them to see where they came from.
Tom has been a member of the Darke County Steam Threshers from the beginning, 39 years, and the mill has been his baby all that time. Tom enjoys doing this, especially with a steam engine powering the mill. But Tom also finds enjoyment as an engineer on another kind of steam power.
I'm a member of the Fort Wayne Railroad Historical Society, part of the steam crew. I'm one of 2 engineers. I look after the engine, so to speak, and we do steam excursions. We've traveled extensively. We've been to New York City, Atlanta, Chicago many times, Detroit, pretty much in the eastern part of the country. When I was a kid, I used to stand by the railroad tracks and watch them go by and always dream about running it. Of course, when the end of steam came and the diesel showed up, I thought, well, that takes care of that. Well, here it is, like a dream come true, a miracle, whatever you want to call it. I really enjoy it.
It's always fascinating to watch someone work when they're an expert at what they're doing. That sure applies to this crew as they go through the well-rehearsed motions of running this mill, just like in the good old days. Powering a sawmill is a tough job for an engineer because the load on his engine is constantly changing. As the huge saw bites into the wood, the load increases suddenly and dramatically. You can hear the sharp exhaust of the engine come alive as it takes up the load. Kim Biesecker is a very experienced engineer, and he knows how tough working a sawmill can be.
Well, a sawmill is hard work for an engine of any size. A sawmill can eat up a lot of horsepower.
Kim is a third-generation member of the Darke County Steam Threshers, and his family has strong ties to this reunion.
My grandfather was active in helping start the show back in the early 50s. And at that time I was 4 years old, I believe. And I was by his side all the time. I grew up with this show. Been to every show, and we've always showed something.
Kim's son, Casey, owns this handsome Baker engine. Casey represents the fourth generation of men in the Biesecker family who have rested a steady hand on the throttle of a steam engine. Even though he's a young man, Casey is an accomplished machinist. He recently made a new crankshaft for this engine, replacing the original crank, which was too badly worn to repair. Casey and Kim often attend steam shows together, and they usually bring 3 engines, all of them Bakers. Kim owns this brawny 25-horse Baker Counterflow, and it's the most powerful engine here. Later today, Kim's going to put this engine on the Prony brake, where he and Amos will run a horsepower curve on the engine. Now this is one powerful machine, and it should be able to develop over 120 horsepower. And that was a tremendous amount of power in the era when these machines were used. Another part of the show is going on now back at the pulling track, where the modified antique tractors are getting ready to pull.
John Walter, Ross, Ohio, coming out next. He calls his tractor the Newsmaker. Sponsored Department, Walter Farms, down the Ross, Ohio area. It's a U Minneapolis Molding. For Minneapolis Molding, the featured tractor here at the Darke County Steam Threshers this year. John Walter, Ross, Ohio, the Newsmaker. Number 8 gets another one. Tractor antique bull right now. The man had it. Jeff Good. Johnny moved on number 8 down there about the 250-foot mark. Jeff Fields out of Rushville, Indiana. Irvin Chew out of Newcastle, Indiana. He's a factory worker over there. On the Chew family pulling team. I see Dad running around here tonight in his golf cart. He's pulled Minneapolis Moleys and Massey Harris's for a long time. These tractors is kind of different. That's all for Irvin Chew from Newcastle.
There are a lot of things to see at this reunion. Valuable spare parts are bought and sold at the various flea market tables scattered about the grounds. And if you go hungry here, well, it's your own fault. There are scores of places to eat, and every one of them serves some great tasting food. Somehow, even a plain old hot dog tastes better outdoors at a show like this. After lunch, the sawmill crew set up with 2 Port Hurons backed into the belts on the big mill. They were the featured steam engine mark at this year's reunion, and this was the first opportunity to see 2 of them working at the same time. The Port Huron design is a little different from most. It's a tandem compound, which means it uses the steam twice in 2 tandem cylinders. There's a small high-pressure cylinder which gets its steam right from the boiler, and a larger low-pressure cylinder in tandem with the first one, which uses the exhaust steam from the high-pressure cylinder for its energy. It was a somewhat complicated way to get a bit more efficiency from the engine by using the steam twice before it was exhausted, but it was never a popular feature because of the additional maintenance involved. One result of compounding is that the exhaust sound of these engines is not quite as sharp or as loud as a non-compound, simple engine. The other featured make at this year's reunion was Minneapolis Moline. Gerald Eaton brought a few gorgeous Molines to the show, including this one from 1949.
Well, it's a 1949 model RTI Moline. It's an industrial tractor. However, it was bought new to be used as a farm tractor. It's got the original tires on it. It's been completely restored from radiator cap to drawbar, so to speak. I've seen lots of RTIs in the older version. I have never seen one of this vintage. Moline was bought in the early 50s by the White Motor Company, along with Oliver and Cockshut. And at that time, a lot of the old devoted users seem to go to a different brand like Harvester or Deere or something of this nature. It's too bad because my opinion, Moline was as good as any of the rest of them.
Small and large gas engines are also a part of a show like this. Ron Rice has a sizable collection, and they all have a fascinating history.
That engine was used at the Oddfellows home in Springfield, Ohio, and it pumped the water for the boiler system in the attic. And it burnt in 1916, and the gentleman that got the engine has had it for over 50 years in his barn, and I accumulated it from him. He's 92 years old, and he wanted somebody to have it that was going to keep it. This engine was built approximately around 1911 to 1913 that we can trace it back. The power is 1.5 horse, and the pump, which is a Foos by the same engine company, was made by the Buckeye Pump Company.
The tractors and engines may be the most visible part of the historical story, but by themselves, they're only part of the story. It's the other machines that these engines powered or pulled that completed the story and allowed the farmer to get productive work done in the fields. The Lockhart family has used John Deere equipment for several generations on the family farm. Collecting and restoring old Deere farm equipment has become a family tradition.
Well, the collection started about 1983 or 84. Dad bought his first tractor. He bought a 37B, which is what he farmed with when he was a kid. And since then, he bought another one. And then me being the middle son got involved and bought one. And then the older son bought one. And then the younger son bought one. So now it's just a family affair. Everybody's involved, from grandma and grandpa down to the 3-year-old grandson. He's just learning how to drive, but he'll be there real shortly. We got about six or seven tractors. And then we wanted to get into something different, so you can see around we started getting into plows, and we bought this piece of machinery here. You don't see many of those. It was just about a task too big to handle. It took us 3 years from start to finish. You'd get tired of it and push it off in the corner for a while, but 3 years of work, and now we got what we like to see, and it's just a lot of fun. It's a John Deere 12A. It's about a 1951, and the uniqueness of it is you just don't see many people take on the task of redoing one. And the other thing, it's just hard to find one in good enough shape to redo. That's a 1947 Model G, and when we bought it, they told us it was a GM, but come to find out it is a Model G. That the directors of John Deere told them to put the battery under the seat in 1947, but come to find out the assembly line didn't do that on the first 2000 or 2500. So the first 2000 or 2500 look like a GM, but in reality they are a G. So it makes it kind of unique. The Model G is the biggest one in our collection. And when it was rated on paper, it was rated at about 39 horsepower. And we put it on the dynometer yesterday. Over here they have a dynometer to test the horsepower. And we put it on the belt pulley and it tested 35.5. So for being 40, 50 years old, it's lost a little bit, but not bad at all. Probably not as much as I'll lose when I'm 50. I think just what keeps you going is just coming out to a show like this and seeing the people enjoy what you're doing. The older guys being able to see a tractor that they farmed with that's in as good, if not better shape when they bought theirs new. And to see the younger kids be able to learn about the yesteryears of how it was done.
Showing folks how it was done is exactly what this show's all about. And over at the big mill, Tom Stevens and the sawmill gang is busy showing the folks how they handle big logs. They use 2 engines. These 2 gorgeous Russells are both backed into the belts on the mill, and it's easy to tell when Tom starts the cut. The stacks come alive, and twin columns of smoke shoot skyward in step with the huge saw as it bites into the wood. These are not compound engines like the Hurons. They're simple engines that use the steam once and then exhaust it out the stack. That's why they're just a bit louder than the Hurons when they're working hard. David Schramm owns this Russell, and like most engineers here, he really enjoys the opportunity to run his engine.
Yeah, there's nothing I like the sound of better than hearing my engine work hard. This is a 1920 Russell steam engine. Its horsepower is 2060. Built in Massillon, Ohio. It's a fairly late one. Russell built engines up to about I think 1924. They went out of business in 1927. This is only the second time I've brought the engine here. Last year they featured Russell engines here, so they invited me down and I liked it here and talked them into letting me come again.
This is a C. Altman Double Star, owned by Dan Greger of Dayton, Ohio. This is a very rare model with a unique design.
22-horse engine. As I said, built by the C. Altman Company. It's called a Double Star Undermount. It's one of 3 left in existence. It was built by the C. Altman Company about 1904, late 1904. Number 1, it's an undermount engine, meaning the engine is under the boiler down in the dirt and getting dirty and filthy. Number two, it's like a tricycle front end. Wheels are together. They made this design so you could make a square turn. This was a road locomotive, more so than a farm engine, for freighting purposes, for hauling whatever you wanted to and from.
Once again, long-lived family traditions have a great deal to do with why Dan is here with his engine.
And my grandfather ran with people that were south of here, and then he did engine repair, any kind of repair like I'm doing, in the wintertime when there was no thrashing or anything else to do and farming wasn't good. So he had what he called the engine shop, and he repaired anything and everything, along with steam, gas, whatever. My first engine was a 16-horse Altman Taylor, and this was not my first. This was the most difficult, because it was in a basket when I bought it, and totally rebuilt. Took about 2.5 years.
In the Greger family, there's a little coal smoke and valve oil on both sides of the family tree.
My first ride on a steam engine was before I was born, and I remember riding on them then from the time, as far back as I can remember, I've been riding steam engines. By the time I was big enough to stand on a pile of wood and reach the steering wheel, I've been steering them. And then by the time I was 8 or 9 years old, I was running it by myself.
Taking kids behind the scenes to show them a little living history is also important to Joyce.
I've had a couple of boys riding with me for the last 2 days, and they're, probably 11 years old or so. And they thought that down thrashing, they were tearing apart bales of hay and throwing them into that machine. They couldn't figure out why they were cutting up perfectly good bales of hay and throwing them in this machine and making a mess out of them. And I had to explain what a thrash machine was and where its place was in history. And also get an appreciation for the machinery. These are beautiful machines. They're well designed. See the variety of ways you could solve a single problem. Like if you needed a source of power that was portable, the variety of different solutions that could come up with for that problem, and they all work.
Over at the Prony Break, Dan Greger and Amos Rixman are getting ready to put on a unique demonstration. Dan's engine is called a double star because it has 2 cylinders instead of just one like all the other engines here. That means that the double star can be loaded down to the point where the engine is almost stalled, but still develop a tremendous amount of torque.
I'm going to ask him to idle the engine very slowly, about like he's doing now. I didn't quite shut it down, that's all right. It's just idling very, very slowly. And at that position, if I quickly put the brake on here, she stops, because his throttle's about closed. Now he's moving slowly again. Now what I'm going to do, and Dan knows what I'm going to do, I'm going to increase the load very, very slowly. Very, very slowly. Don't let me stop you, Dan. A little bit of throttle.
There are only 2 machines that man has ever invented that can do this: an electric motor and a multiple cylinder steam engine. Gasoline engines, diesel engines, turbines, virtually all other types of power plants can't develop anywhere near their maximum torque when turning over very slowly, like Dan's double star is doing right now. That rhythmic exhaust was a very common sound in this country 100 years ago, and to many it was a sound to be thoroughly enjoyed.
I happen to know a little bit about classical music and that sort of thing, but to me that's a symphony orchestra as well.
Amos Rixman is the man who operates this Prony Break. Amos is a fascinating guy who really knows his way around machinery.
Well, this Prony Break measures horsepower, and we do other things than just measure the horsepower. We can show governor action, how good it is, the power curves, the torque rise, and apply all that in a very modern way. It compares directly with modern tractors, and it's very interesting from that standpoint, not just to the hobbyist. But the Prony Break itself is really a dynamometer. It's a simple device, it's accurate, If you have a good tack and a good scale, it's absolute on the money. The brake tells a lot of things to the public. It's actually an educational event, which we try to make it, and it's interesting to the engineers, and they get a record of their engine performance as well. Young people today are very, very unused to hearing the details of engineering unless they're in it, particularly their cars and their tractors or whatever they have. They don't get into it very much and don't understand it. And we try to get the understanding across, which is education, of course. And we do get a lot of comments from not just young people, but all ages, where people like to hear about this, get to know about it, and then mainly apply it and understand what they're doing when they have a tractor or automobile or truck or whatever it is.
Almost every engineer at this reunion looks forward to putting his engine to the test on the Prony brake to see exactly how much power their engine can make. Here, Sam Myers has his engine in the belt on the brake, and his beautiful Keck Gunnerman is working all out. Another engineer getting ready to go on the brake is Kim Biesecker with his Big Baker. Like most of the engines here, it's got a fascinating history.
Well, this engine come out of Michigan. It was on a sawmill, and the Holps went up there and bought it and took it to Lewisburg, Ohio, and used it to steam tobacco beds with for years. And I came along, decided to buy it and fix it up the way my grandfather did one of his engines back in the 40s. All it was the boiler and engine and the front wheels. I built the rest of it up. It's a 25 Baker, and they only made 25 of them, and this was the last one built. And as far as we know, this is the only one left. This is probably the biggest horsepower engine here on the grounds today at the show.
In order to develop maximum horsepower on the Prony brake, everything has to be just right. Kim will use a lot of coal and water in this run, so ample supplies of both are ready. Kim must also work his fire into shape for the hard work to come, but he's an old hand at that.
Yeah, I'm also involved with the Fort Wayne Railroad Historical Society. Do maintenance on it and also fire that locomotive.
The other engineers around here have tagged this engine with a nickname. They call it the Monster Baker, and for good reason. It's one of the most powerful engines ever made, and certainly the most powerful engine here today. Now, these horsepower ratings can be a little confusing. The 25 horsepower refers to the engine's pulling power, like when the engine would pull a plow. But because these engines don't move very fast, their horsepower ratings for pulling are pretty low. But the horsepower developed at the belt for powering other machinery is much higher, partly because of the higher speed available at the belt. The Prony brake itself is a unique machine, and like the sawmill, the Darke County steam threshers own this brake. It looks like Amos is ready to start, so here we go.
What we're doing in this exhibit is to do several things in the way of performance. We measure the horsepower. We like to show you what the engines sounded like when they were in their working era. Talk about their governors and how well they did their job. We like to imitate a threshing scene or a sawmill scene and let you hear that. But we do it all with this device, which is called a Prony brake, P-R-O-N-Y. P-R-O-N-Y is the name of the man who invented it well over 100 years ago. And they didn't have electric dynamometers then, or hydraulic dynamometers, or even mechanical dynamometers. So they developed this brake. And they would put a belt, as you see it here, to the shaft through a pulley. And then they could regulate the load by clamping on the brake, which is made up of a lot of wooden blocks that go all the way around. And those wooden blocks then are lubricated with beef suet. And when we have water going in to cool it, and as it's running and the water gets to be an inch to 2 inches deep in there, it's picked up by a pipe that's fitted right in that position, and the overflow goes out through the exhaust. Well, he's popping off, so he's ready to go. So we're going to take a number of readings and run what we might call a power curve, or actually it is called a power curve. We'll start very light. We'll start at 100. That's a convenient place. And we'll go up from there. And right now it's at 100 pounds, or 525 foot-pounds, at 262 RPM right here at the brake. Now we're going to go in 10 increments. That's going to take a while, but it gives us a good curve. 110. 258, 120, 255, 130, 253, 140, 252 on the attack, 150 on the scale. What do you see? 255 on the attack, 160 on the scale, 253, 170 on the scale. Notice that then exhaust is coming clearer now. 170, did I say? What's the RPM? 254, 180, 250, 190, 249, 200, 249 again. Remember what I said about torque? Right now we're at 1,050 foot-pounds. 210, 248, 220, 248 again, 230, 248, 240. 245, 250, 247, 260, 247, 270 on scale, 245 on tack, 280 on scale, 245, 290, 245. Look at her hold steady there, no drop in speed. 300, 245, 310. 45, 320, 45, 330, 245, like an auctioneer here almost, 340, 243, 350, 243, 360, 243, wow, 370, 242 on tack, 380, 239 on tack, 390, 239, 400, 2,100 pounds of torque. 400 at 238. All right, 410. 238 again, 420. 238, 430. 236, 440. 234, 450. 236, 460. I'm going to jump to 480. Read. 500. 230, 520. 227, 540. 222, 550. 218, 560. 212, 570. 203, 580. 290, 199, 590. 189 and 600. 186. Now draw your line. When we were going through the power curve, I read many loads at the same RPM. That tells me right away that not only is the governor good, but so is the engine. And we're going to have some very good results here, well over 100 horsepower. And that engine would have been rated around 80 or so. Okay, here we go. 610. Right to 610. 610, read it. 200. We're going to 620. Read it. 199. We might as well go to 630. Read it. 194. We're going to 640 now. Read it. 19 even. 190. That was 640, right? We're going to 650. 650, read. 189. Well, we might as well go to 660. He's hanging on pretty good. 660. Read it. Yep, read it now. What? One more. 670. 670, read. 179. We're going to 680. Read. That's it, we can't do any more. This engine is running in a high power range right now, and it doesn't really matter whether it's high like it is or lower. The varying loads that I was showing like this, we often show that as a threshing scene, but you would very rarely find a thresh machine that would pull this heavy. A lot of times today in the late diesel engine literature, Caterpillar, Cummins, tractors, whatever, they're all very proud of how they can hold their horsepower on a flat curve. Well, they do a pretty good job, but they don't touch this.
With a peak reading of over 123 horsepower, I guess you can see why they call this engine the Munster Baker. That's a tremendous amount of power for an old machine like this. In fact, the only machines on these grounds with more horsepower than Kim's Baker were the Superstock diesel tractors. In the final event of the day, they filled the early evening sky with lots of diesel smoke and lots of noise.
They live within about 5 miles of St. Mary's or less, and here he is tonight at the Darke County Fairgrounds, racing the RC engine. About 250, 255 feet. Okay, he's got the chain tight. The flags are green. Rising smoke listening for the Thunders. Tom Foley from Hamilton, Ohio with his International. For Tom, she gave up on him. That's all for Tom.
Some of these Superstockers burn alcohol in their engines. With alcohol, they don't make any smoke, but they still make lots of horsepower. These boys put on quite a show, but the real purpose of this reunion is to see and appreciate the old steam machines of yesteryear. After all, this is the Darke County steam threshers we're talking about. It takes a lot of time, money, hard work, and dedication to restore one of these old machines. It takes even more effort to keep them maintained and operating in like-new condition. After all, if you need a part for one of these things, you can't get it at your local hardware store. You've got to make it yourself. But what is it about these machines that makes them so fascinating? Maybe there's several reasons. First, these are honest machines. There's nothing hidden under a lot of fancy sheet metal. All the working parts are right out in the open, for everybody to see and appreciate. And they let you know when they're working hard by what you hear from the stack. Second, and perhaps even more intriguing, is that these machines are literally a page out of an American history book come alive. They're living, breathing examples of what life was like for farmers and lumbermen in the country 100 years ago. The people who restore, preserve, and operate these machines do so out of a love of both the machinery and the memories that they represent. Joyce Gregor sums it up pretty well.
And there's something about a steam engine. They're not like a gasoline engine or a tractor or an electric motor or anything else. A steam engine that's cold is a piece of machinery, but for some reason, when you throw a fire in that engine and it's got pressure on it, it's not like any other machine. There's almost a quality of living about it.
Living history. That's what it's all about. Remembrance of a time when it was a common sight to see coal smoke in the heartland.